On a lab table on Hatteras Island, a marine archaeologist holds the jawbone of a deer. Lodged inside it is a lead musket ball. Now, you cannot carbon date a musket ball, but you can carbon date the deer it killed. And when the teeth came back from a laboratory in California, the answer was the 1580s. The exact decade 115 English colonists were said to have vanished from the coast of North Carolina without a trace. For 4 centuries, that has been the whole story. They landed at Roanoke. They disappeared. One word carved on a post, an empty fort, and America's oldest unsolved mystery. But the deer bone does not fit that story. Neither does the blacksmith's forge waste in the same soil. The kind of debris you can only make, never trade. Neither does a second fort that someone hid under a patch glued onto a 400-year-old map in the British Museum. So here is what we are going to do. We are going to name the scientists, show you exactly what came out of the ground, and settle the one question every headline got backwards. Because you have probably seen the claim that DNA finally found the descendants of the lost colonists. It did not. No colonist skeleton has ever been recovered, which means there is nothing to match a living person against. And the geneticists running that search say so themselves. The real proof was never in a test tube. It was locked inside the jaw of a deer. Part of this is now proven. Part is still fought over. And part of the reason you were told they simply vanished is a story that someone, for a very long time, had every reason to keep selling. Start with the man who grew up where it supposedly happened. Scott Dawson was raised on Hatteras Island, and today he runs a small museum in Buxton, North Carolina, filled with what his neighbors keep pulling out of the sand. Ask him about the Lost Colony, and he will tell you something that sounds almost rude. The mystery, he says, is a marketing campaign for a play. To the families who have lived on these barrier islands for generations, the colonists were never lost at all. They knew where they went, because their own ancestors were there when it happened. The play is real, and it is still running. In 1937, a playwright named Paul Green staged an outdoor drama called The Lost Colony at the Waterside Theater on the grounds of Fort Raleigh on Roanoke Island. It opened on the 4th of July, in the depths of the Great Depression, built on purpose as an engine for tourism. That summer, President Franklin Roosevelt himself sat in the audience on the 18th of August, the day that would have been the 350th birthday of Virginia Dare. More than 4 million people have watched it since, all the way to its 5,000th performance in 2024, and every one of those nights sold the same promise. A colony that vanished. A word no one could explain. A riddle with no answer. There is nothing sinister in a town telling a good story about itself. But once the story became the product, the answer became inconvenient. The National Park Service manages Fort Raleigh as a National Historic Site and holds many of the key artifacts, and the whole experience is built around that single word, mystery. A solved case does not sell tickets, and so the romantic version, the 100 and more souls who stepped off the edge of the map, kept its grip long after historians had stopped believing it. That matters, because the newest version of the myth arrived only recently, and it is already everywhere. In the last 2 years, a wave of articles announced that DNA had finally identified the descendants of the lost colonists. It is the same sold story in a modern costume. No colonist remains have ever been dug up. There is no genetic sample to compare a living person against. No confirmed match. And the scientists who run that research are the first to say so. We will come back to what the DNA can and cannot prove, because that is where nearly every article on this went wrong. For now, only this. The test tube did not solve Roanoke. It could not have. And here is the part that separates this from conspiracy, because we do not deal in conspiracies. What happened is quieter and more human. A tourism myth, an academic culture that prizes caution over headlines, and decades of thin funding all pushed the same way, toward leaving the romantic question open. The historian David Beers Quinn argued for the simpler answer more than half a century ago, and the historian James Horn has argued it for years. The colonists, they said, did not vanish. They assimilated. They walked off the island and into the families who had welcomed them. Which leaves a harder question, the one the play never asks. If they were not lost, then why did roughly 115 English men, women, and children have to leave a fort the Crown had spent a fortune to build? To answer that, we have to look at something the play leaves out, and it is written in the rings of ancient trees. In 1998, a team led by the climate scientist David Stahl at the University of Arkansas published a study in the journal Science. They had read the growth rings of bald cypress trees along the Tidewater coast, trees old enough to hold an 800-year record of every wet and dry season. And in the 3 years the colony was trying to survive, from 1587 to 1589, they found the worst drought in all 8 centuries, striking the exact coast where 100 newcomers had just been told to feed themselves off unfamiliar land. The archaeologist Dennis Blanton, then at the College of William and Mary, tied that climate record to the human one. And the human one was already going wrong. Consider how they even ended up there. The colonists had orders to settle on the Chesapeake farther north, on better ground. But the pilot of their fleet, a Portuguese navigator named Simon Fernandes, put them ashore at Roanoke instead and refused to carry them farther. The rosters vary a little. Some counts say 112, some 121, but historians most often settle on around 115. Roughly 90 were men, only 17 were women, and a handful were children. That imbalance tells you this was never meant to be a self-sufficient farming town from day one. It was meant to be resupplied. Then the killing started early. Just 3 days after landing, a colonist named George Howe wandered out alone to catch crabs in the shallows, and he was killed where he stood, struck by 16 arrows and finished with wooden swords. One man, 16 arrows, before the colony was even a week old. Their governor, John White, understood what that meant. Without supplies, in a drought, surrounded by peoples they had already made enemies of, they could not last. So he sailed back to England for help, leaving behind his own daughter and his infant granddaughter. He meant to return within months. He did not set foot on that coast again for 3 years. England had gone to war with Spain, and when the Armada came in 1588, every seaworthy English ship, including the ones meant for Roanoke, was seized. By the time White finally came back, in the summer of 1590, the fort was empty, the houses were gone, and a single word was carved into a post. We all know that word, and we all know that the settlement was found abandoned, the boats gone, and no sign of the distress cross White had told them to leave if they were ever taken by force. What we almost never talk about is the obvious next question. If they left on their own, and they had somewhere to go, then where did they go, and what did they leave behind in the ground? The answer has been coming out of the ground for the last 15 years, one piece at a time, and it starts with a map. John White was not only a governor, he was an artist, and around 1585, he painted a watercolor chart of the coast he had explored. A map so precise that modern researchers have laid it over satellite imagery and watched the coastline match. It hangs today in the British Museum in London. And in 2012, A board member of the First Colony Foundation named Brent Lane was studying it when he noticed something odd. 2 small patches of paper had been glued onto the map, as if to cover a mistake. So the museum put the original on a light table and shone a light up through the paper. Underneath one patch was a symbol hidden for 4 centuries. A 4-sided fort, drawn in red and blue, sitting inland where 2 rivers meet, the Chowan and the Roanoke, in what is now Bertie County, about 50 miles from the coast. And stranger still, above that fort was the faint outline of a second fort, apparently sketched in invisible ink. The historians James Horn and Eric Klingelhofer read it the same way. This was where the colony planned to go, and White may have hidden it from Spain, which was hunting English settlements along this coast. The most important thing on the document was the thing someone had painted over, a pattern anyone who has followed our digs beneath Giza already knows. If you want to see where the covering up finally breaks down, and what a shovel found waiting at that fort, stay with us, and take a second to subscribe, because from here, the official story stops holding together. The dig there was led by the archaeologist Nicholas Lacchetti of the First Colony Foundation on Salmon Creek in Bertie County, almost exactly where White's notes said the colonists meant to move, 50 miles into what he called the Main. What came out of the soil was not treasure. It was pottery, a specific English earthenware called Surrey Hampshire border ware, and a broken plate can matter more than gold, because in the entire New World of that era, it has turned up in only 3 places: Jamestown, Roanoke Island itself, and this spot, which the team named Site X. Around 40 fragments from 6 or 7 vessels, along with small hooks for stretching cloth and the little brass tips from clothing laces. Not the debris of a trading post that came and went, but of an English household that stayed and cooked and mended its clothes. Lacchetti has been careful, more careful than the headlines about his work. What Site X proves, he says, is that a small group, perhaps 6 to 10 colonists, lived here for a time. A splinter, not the whole colony. His own foundation has said plainly that there is not, and probably never will be, a single smoking gun for the Lost Colony. And that honesty is exactly why the next site matters so much. The next site is on Hatteras Island at Cape Creek, and Cape Creek was the capital of the Croatoan, the very people whose name was carved on that fort post. For years, the archaeologist Mark Horton, now at the Royal Agricultural University and formerly at the University of Bristol, worked that ground with Scott Dawson and his Croatoan Archaeological Society. And what they kept pulling up was not trade goods. It was hammer scale, the tiny flakes of metal that fly off hot iron when a blacksmith strikes it, smaller than a grain of rice. You cannot buy it. You cannot trade for it. It falls in only one place, the dirt floor beside a working forge. Finding it on Hatteras means someone there was forging European iron, and the native peoples of that coast did not run blacksmith shops. Beside it lay bars of raw iron, the stock of a smith who had come to stay. And then, this year, came the deer we opened with. At Cape Creek, the team recovered the jawbone of a white-tailed deer with a lead musket ball lodged inside it, an animal shot with a European firearm. Bone like that cannot be dated directly with much precision, but the animal's teeth can be, and they were sent to a laboratory in California for radiocarbon analysis, overseen with the bioarchaeologist Beth Scafidi of the University of California, Merced. The result came back to the 1580s. The findings were presented on the 26th of March, 2026, at an East Carolina University lecture series called Science on the Sound. As Dawson put it, you cannot carbon date a musket ball, but you can carbon date a deer. And all of them came back to the 1580s. We have to be fair about what that is and is not. It is strong evidence, but it is new, and the researchers themselves are careful. The sample is small. Radiocarbon dating carries a margin of error measured in years, and none of it has cleared peer review yet. But it points hard in one direction, toward English colonists living among the Croatoan in the exact decade they were said to have vanished. Which brings us to the question everyone has been shouting from the headlines. If the ground is this full of them, then surely, at last, the DNA has found them. The honest answer is the one the headlines cannot sell. The DNA has not found them. In 2007, a genealogist named Roberta Estes founded the Lost Colony DNA Project to trace living descendants of the colonists. Nearly 20 years later, there is still no confirmed match to a single one of them. And the reason is simple. To match old DNA to living DNA, you need old DNA. And old DNA comes from bones. And not one colonist's remains have ever been recovered from anywhere. There is nothing to test. Estes herself has said it plainly, that DNA is not a magic bullet. So when you see an article claiming genetics revealed the survivors, you are looking at a story that ran out ahead of its own evidence. The thing that actually ties these people to that ground did not come from a laboratory vial. It came from a deer's jaw and a crate of broken English pottery. The surnames are their own kind of trap. People carrying Old English names like Dare and Harvey and Cooper, still live in the region, and the rare ones carry a little weight, while common names like Brown or Bailey prove nothing, since half the English-speaking world carries them. Much of this traces back to Hamilton Macmillan, who in the 1880s drew up a list linking a native community, the people we now call the Lumbee, to the Lost Colony. What is rarely mentioned is the context. He made that argument during a political fight over recognition for that community, and no record connects the Lumbee to Roanoke before 1888. The Lumbee historian Melinda Maynor Lowry has noted that the testing companies do not even hold enough Lumbee reference samples to run the comparison honestly. The Lumbee are a people with their own long and documented history. They deserve better than to be a footnote in someone else's English mystery. So what actually happened to the colonists? There is no single settled answer yet, and honest scholars hold three possibilities at once. The first is assimilation on Hatteras, the Horton and Dawson case, strong, but not yet through peer review. The second is the inland move to Site X that Lucchetti documented, real but only for a small splinter. The third is the darkest. The historian David Beers Quinn believed most of them tried for the Chesapeake and died there, and a 17th century writer named William Strachey recorded a claim that the chief Powhatan had ordered English settlers killed, though critics note that killing happened outside Powhatan's territory, with nothing tying it to these particular colonists. It may be that the colony did not have one fate at all. It may be that it split and scattered, and that different people met different ends. What remains, in the end, are the names. Virginia Dare, born on the 18th of August, 1587, the first English child born in the Americas, her whole life reduced to a birth and a disappearance. Manteo, the Croatoan man who had crossed the ocean to England and back, baptized and named Lord of Roanoke on the 13th of August that same year, the first Native American ever given an English title of nobility, and a second baby that almost no one remembers, the child of Dionys and Joan Harvey, born on that island just days after Virginia Dare, whose name and sex were never even written down. A person who existed and was lost twice, once from the colony and once from the record. And then, more than a century later, a witness. In 1709, an English surveyor named John Lawson visited Hatteras and met native families there with gray eyes, who told him their ancestors were white people who could, in his words, talk in a book, and who spoke of the ships of Sir Walter Raleigh that had once come to their shore. We began on a lab table, with the jaw of a deer and a musket ball that should never have been inside it. That deer was shot in the 1580s by someone holding a European gun on an island whose people carved their own name onto a fort post, as if to say, plainly, they came with us. For 400 years we were told the colonists vanished without a trace, but the trace was there the whole time. It was in the tree rings and the pottery and the forge scale and the gray eyes of children who could talk in a book. We did not fail to find them because they hid. We failed because the wrong answer was easier to sell, and because the newest wrong answer was small enough to fit inside a test tube. They were never lost. We were only looking where the story told us to look. And somewhere out there, still under the sand and the salt marsh, are the bones that could one day speak their names for certain. We just have not turned over the right patch of earth yet.